We begin with the circle of innocence, the circle of potential, and move on from there to the split. A split that can occur traumatically in the form of dissociation or by partnership and attunement as the child watches the facial expressions of the parent and moves into attunement with the role that is the acceptable cultured self. On the outside of that shape, which is always a reduction from the whole, lies the dissociated self, the rebel, the one that seeks to undermine the system that excludes it. In the case of traumatic dissociation, as in a parent flying into a rage and demanding that the child adopt a shape or be obliterated as an identity, a traumatic threat physically, psychologically, emotionally, we have states of dissociated trauma. We also have the shadow, those light and dark parts of the self that don't fit into the box of the culture, and with it, the unconscious. Now, the initial structure of the cult or culture provides a framework of consciousness through language, through dominant paradigms, for an individual to wake up, to grow up within that frame of reference, which ultimately leads one to the boundary, to the edge, which in the initiation into adolescence must be dissolved, must be betrayed, must be rebelled against in order to reclaim more of the whole self. And as the initial dissolving and shattering of the original structure takes place as part of healthy evolution, a new structure, to be conscious as a human being, one must think. Thought and language are inextricably connected. One must think within a new system of paradigms, of words, of language. And so a new, more complex, more inclusive system is then formed as the child, the imprisoned child, moves into the rebellion of the adolescent with that chaos, and a new synthesis, a new order coming into place with the adult within a new system that, although more inclusive, although more complex, and thus holding more potential, still always maintains a boundary, a wound, outside of which the dissociated rebel with its sabotage, the trauma with its differentiated parts, the challenger of that data which lies outside the system, the shadow and the unconsciousness remain just in smaller volume relative to that which is within the new system. All systems that include a limited amount of the self must be expanded continually, must dissolve and be reformed to be more inclusive continually, or be overwhelmed, overthrown, rebelled against, sabotaged by the parts of the self, by the parts of the psyche, by the part of the integrated oneness, the unconscious whole that lies outside of that boundary. And so every system will be met with a challenger, a rebel, an outlaw, a fool, someone who doesn't see and grasp the boundary. And the challenger will be in the form of data, anomalous data, that doesn't fit within the system. You complete the mathematical formula and there's a remainder that suggests there's something beyond that particular equation. You study the science of feelings and eventually you brush up against the thoughts that create those feelings. And then you brush up against the thoughts that created those thoughts and those feelings. And one must complete the full circle. One must be led by the mathematics of the whole outside of the boundary. Because one can take an ecological landmass such as the United States and say it begins here. But the rivers that flow into the United States from Canada belie the illusion of that boundary. They do not exist except for what is without the boundary. The air that is in the United States does not exist except in the context of a whole that is outside the boundary. So whatever the system of thought, of feeling, of geography, of mathematics, of finance is, the deep embrace and intimacy with that system must eventually take one to the edge. And as one encounters the edge and grapples with the equation of how does something come out of nothing right at that edge of unconsciousness, it pushes the boundary back as what was formerly unconscious becomes more conscious, as the limited system becomes more complex.